If I wanted to lose as much body fat as humanly possible in 30 days, here's exactly what I'd do. I've been strength training for over a decade, and I've used this method multiple times myself as well as with clients, so I know for a fact that it works. Now, before we break this down into the 4-part plan that's simple but not easy, let's define our objectives really quick. So number one, obviously we want to lose as much body fat as possible. We also want to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. It's going to be extremely beneficial for your metabolism as well as your overall look. And then as a bonus at the end, I'll get into a specific strategy that you can use to peak if you have like a single day event or single day that you want to look your best. Now, of course, because you're intelligent, you knew this was going to involve dieting. So first, we're going to determine our weekly calorie need. This is because we're going to be implementing carb cycling as well as intermittent fasting. So our calories on a daily basis will change a decent amount based on our training and what we're doing that specific day. So we'll calculate this over a weekly basis so it's a little bit easier to track. So first things first here, you need to calculate your maintenance calories. So I'll drop a link to a BMR calculator that you can use to get that exact number. Try to estimate your energy expenditure as accurately as possible so you can get the most accurate number here. So go ahead and pause the video, go get your maintenance calories, and then come back. All right, welcome back. Now you've got your maintenance calories. So now we're going to subtract 750 from that. 750 calories is going to be our daily deficit on average. Now, this is pretty aggressive. So I'm making the assumption here that you're only doing this for 30 days, you're very serious about it, and that you're generally healthy, because 750 calories a day as a deficit is super aggressive. If you want to tone this down a little bit, you could go to 500 if you're pretty serious but not crazy serious. I wouldn't go higher than 750 because, again, we want to maintain as much muscle mass as possible so we can look the best on that final day, our peak day. So now we've got our maintenance calories, subtracted 750. Now we're going to multiply that by 7. So I'll do an example and kind of go along with you so you've got something to reference here. Let's say, for example, somebody figured out their maintenance calories were 2,500. Take 750 off of that, you get 1,750, and then multiply that by 7. So they would have 12,250 calories on a weekly basis. So now let's talk protein and how we're going to split up our carbs over the course of the week so that we can maximize performance as well as fat loss. All right, so now we're going to determine our specific nutrient breakdown. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be carb cycling. So we're going to take protein into account. Then we'll do some math to figure out our fats and our carbs. Now, there's a little bit of math to this next step, but I'll make you guys a deal. If this video gets 50 comments and 50 likes, I will just make this calculator and put it up for you guys. If it doesn't, we have to do math. Protein we're going to determine first because that's super important to maintain muscle as well as satiety, give you that feeling of fullness because you're going to be hungry. We're in a super aggressive deficit. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be carb cycling. So we'll have some days that are higher carb and lower fat, and then vice versa, some days that are higher fat and lower carb. Not necessarily high carb or high fat, but we do want to utilize carbs strategically for your training days so you can get the most out of those, burn the most number of calories, and then keep carbs low on your non-training days so we can minimize insulin and help you torch as much fat as possible. All right, so let's get into it. We're going to determine our protein breakdown first. So I'm going to go with 1 gram per pound of your current body weight. So whatever your current body weight is, that's how many grams of protein you're going to get every single day. That's not going to change. We're not cycling protein. Protein's the same every day. And again, this is a super important must hit because you want to maintain muscle mass. It'll also just make the diet easier because you'll feel fuller. Then we're going to take that number, multiply it by 28. 28 because there's 7 days in a week and protein has 4 calories per gram. So 7 times 4 is 28. So again, example so you can follow along. We're going to say our made up test subject is 200 pounds. So multiply that by 28 and we get 5,600. That's the number of calories that he's going to get from protein. So if we know that we have 5,600 calories coming from protein, we know the rest come from carbs and fats. So we'll subtract that number from our total weekly calorie count that we calculated in the last step. So now let's break down our other calories into carbs and fats. We're going to use 1/3, 2/3. So we're going to take 1 part of our remaining 6,650 calories and allocate that to fat. So that'll come up to 2,217 calories from fat. And then the rest will go to carbs. Now for fat, you're going to divide your caloric number by 9. That's because fat has 9 calories per gram. So we want to get to the number of grams of fat that we've got. We'll do the same thing for carbs, but for carbs, there are 4 calories per gram. So we'll divide that number by 4. And then after all that, we get to a total of 1,108 grams of carbs over the course of the week. and 246 grams of fat over the course of the week. Now, my recommendation would be to keep your fats relatively constant, so almost the same amount of fat every day, but to modify your carbs such that you have higher carbohydrate intake on your performance and training days. All right, so now we have our weekly totals for carbohydrates and fats. Let's talk about how we're going to break those up over the course of the week. So I'm going to assume that this test subject we have here is training on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And Monday and Friday are really his harder sessions. So he wants to prioritize the highest carb intake for those 2 sessions, but he also wants it a little bit higher on Wednesday. And that means he can essentially just decide what sort of carb intake he wants on those days, maybe like 1-to-1 with protein or slightly higher than protein, and then distribute the rest of the carbs throughout the rest of the week. The really cool thing with this approach is you can kind of track weekly and make adjustments as you go. So maybe you have one hard training day and you feel like you want more carbs that day. You just take it off of your weekly total and track your carbs and fats on a weekly basis. I would keep fats, like I said earlier, relatively constant, maybe a little higher on the highest carbohydrate days, just because it's really difficult to eat a ton of protein and a ton of carbs with almost no fat. So those days will have higher calories, but they'll most importantly have higher carbohydrates. And that's because we want to maximize the anti-catabolic and anabolic effects of insulin on our training days, as well as have as much energy as possible so that we can burn the maximum amount of calories, have high training intensity on those days. And then on the lower carb days, we're going to be minimizing insulin as much as possible so your body can be in a fat burning state, as well as just having lower calories overall so we can maximize our weight loss and the amount of fat that we're burning on those non-training days where we don't have a huge demand for performance. So over the course of the week, you can see protein stays constant because we're not making any changes there. Carbs fluctuate up and down a little bit, as well as fat to a smaller degree, but we hit our weekly targets and those total up to our weekly calorie total. It's only off by 4 because of rounding. So, hey, extra gram of carbs. All right, so now we're in awesome shape because we're maximizing the effects of insulin in both directions in terms of maintaining muscle as well as in terms of burning fat. So that's the carb cycling piece. We're also going to do intermittent fasting, and I would recommend like a 16-8 tempo where you have 16 hours where you're completely fasted, and then in your 8-hour eating window, whatever 8 hours works for you and makes the most sense for your life, that's when you're eating all of your calories. So during that 16-hour fasting window, absolutely 0 calories, no food. 0 calorie beverages are okay. So black coffee, green tea, black tea, 0 calorie beverages, water obviously, are going to be perfect. And I would say actually caffeine will probably be helpful during that fasting window because to some degree it does blunt hunger, but also caffeine helps to liberate fat from fat tissue. So if you wanted to do something like skip breakfast and just have, black coffee for breakfast basically, and then have your 8-hour eating window later in the day, it's a perfect way to do this. So we'll do 16-8 intermittent fasting every day as well. And that's it for the diet stuff. So let's get on to steps 3 and 4 so we can finish out this plan. All right, number 3 is going to be strength training and HIIT part of our plan. So I'm going to recommend a strength training plan that's something like 2 to 5 sessions per week. I would say honestly 3, maybe 4 would be ideal. This is because we don't want to absolutely maximize the amount of volume that we're getting and train extremely intensely because you're going to be in a pretty severe calorie deficit. What we do want to prioritize is full body training with relatively high volume. That's why I'm limiting it to only 3 to 4 sessions per week, maybe 5 on the absolute top end. So I would say high volume is going to be somewhere between 12 and 20 working sets. Again, I would have a inverse relationship of training sessions to number of work sets per session. So if you're hitting 5 sessions a week, I would lean towards that lower number of 12 working sets per session. Obviously, this can be any workout split that you'd like, but I would prioritize full body training just because our goal here is preserving muscle. And then one last note on strength training, I would not be attempting any sort of like high strength PR attempts. So no max singles, probably not even max like doubles or triples. I would just be focusing on specifically those like bodybuilding rep ranges, which to me would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 20, maybe even 25, because we want to maximize volume, stimulate muscle protein synthesis so we can maintain our tissue, and higher volume typically leads to more calories expended, which is another one of our goals. So that's how I would kind of structure the strength training program. In addition to that, at the end of every strength training session, I would encourage you to do some HIIT training. So HIIT is high intensity interval training, and essentially it's just 3 sprints or a number of sprints, but I'm going to say 3 sprints of 20 to 30 seconds, maybe about 90 seconds, 2 minutes tops in terms of rest in between these. And the sprint can be anything. It can be literally sprinting. If you feel healthy and like you're not going to injure yourself, it can be battle ropes. It can be the assault bike. It can be, climbing rope, anything that's very difficult for you and very strenuous for 20 to 30 seconds, 90 seconds rest in between, and then 3 of those to finish out your strength training session. So why are we using HIIT here? HIIT actually has huge effects on growth hormone, which are going to be anti-catabolic. As we mentioned earlier, it's going to prevent the tear down of tissue. So it's going to help you save and hang on to muscle tissue that you want to keep. But it's also extremely beneficial for fat burning. So again, hitting all of our objectives here. Torch fat, keep the muscle. So that's number 3. Now let's move on to the last part of the plan, number 4, and then we'll get to the bonus and peak. All right, for the last component of our fat burning plan, we're going to incorporate low intensity, steady state, fasted cardio. I would recommend this first thing in the morning, but something like 20 to 45 minutes, 6 days a week, 7 days a week if you want to go crazy, but giving you an off day. I would start here. If you haven't done cardio consistently for a very long period of time, I would start here at 20 minutes, see how that feels for about the first week, and then work your way up by 5-minute intervals every week. Now, it's really important that this is fasted because we want to have our insulin as low as possible while we're doing this cardio. That just has to do with the body's capacity to readily burn through fat tissue as opposed to food that's in your stomach and calories that were just consumed. And we want to be targeting the fat stores that are on our body sitting there ready for use rather than the food that's in our belly being digested that we probably need the glycogen from because we got to strength train later. So fasted cardio, low intensity, steady state for 20 to 45 minutes, 6 days a week. In terms of modality, this could be anything that you prefer. So a brisk walk, stair climber, swimming even, whatever is really your preference here. And I would do something to enhance the value of this time for you. So make sure that you're, if you're walking outside, like walk an enjoyable route that you like with good scenery, or listen to an audiobook, or listen to a podcast that you like, or heck, if you're on a treadmill, like watch a movie or watch TV or something. Just make it so that this time isn't miserable and it doesn't feel like, oh, here's the fat burning part of my diet. Like you're just taking a walk. That's all it is. And because I know that there may be questions about supplementation, what things should I add? Generally, I'm not a huge fan of like leaning on supplementation. It's in the name. It should be a supplement to an already good diet. But there's a couple, especially in a really steep deficit, that I think can be useful. One is caffeine. It doesn't necessarily help with the deficit, but there is some evidence that caffeine can increase energy expenditure during like your fasted cardio. Caffeine before fasted cardio, in my opinion, first thing in the morning, 10 out of 10. But caffeine will, help you kind of maintain energy, as well as if you need a little extra kick before your strength training sessions because you may be pretty tired and lethargic because calories are really low. Caffeine's a good go-to there. I also really love creatine monohydrate. I love creatine across the board in strength training phases as well as in fat loss phases because it is anti-catabolic, and creatine has been extensively studied to increase strength and power output almost across the board in athletes. It's one of the most studied and consistent supplements out there. Totally safe. I wouldn't go with anything crazy or fancy. Creatine monohydrate's pretty inexpensive, and it's got all the benefits of the other crazy formulations out there. Third recommendation would be some sort of protein powder that you can just make shakes with. I like whey protein isolate personally. Don't absolutely have to get isolate, but I think it's the best in terms of digestion and just being the easiest to assimilate. There's also other options, obviously, like beef protein, egg protein. If you're vegan, I guess it would be like pea and brown rice. Make sure you choose one that's not too crazy on carbs and fats, because again, you want to be tracking your carbs and fats and make sure that those stay within range. But just to hit protein targets, whey protein makes life way easier most of the time. And then last one is fish oil. That's, again, one that I would consider in almost any context. Fish oil has been shown to have some really positive cognitive impacts, and it also is just generally really good for inflammation and helping with recovery. So fish oil is one that I'd recommend almost all the time. All right, that's it for sups and the cardio section. So now let's talk about how to peak for the day that you want to look the best. All right, so congrats, you've done it. You've made it through the majority of this 30-day cut. So I'm going to start here 4 days out from your desired peak date. So whatever that event is, pick a date 4 days out. And here's some of the changes that we're going to make. I want to kind of preface this. This is not the most intricate, insane, 100% foolproof peaking protocol. Like I'm not getting you ready for, a bodybuilding competition with this, but these are some really simple things that you can implement to look your best on that day. So starting day 4 or 4 days out, D-4, we're going to keep carbs as low as is tolerable at this point. Now, at this point, you're going to be the leanest you've been. So it's going to be pretty tough, whatever that amount realistically is to you. It kind of just comes down to like, how deeply do you want to suffer realistically? But carbs somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 to 100 grams is probably going to be a good bet. And we're going to continue that low carb intake for the next 3 days. And then 2 days out, I would stop all strength training and hit cardio. Reason for this is just because strength training causes a little bit of water retention in your muscle, just because there's some inflammation from the training your body's trying to cover. So this will really just cut your water retention so that you look as dry, as they say in bodybuilding, but really as lean and as aesthetically awesome as possible. All right, day before. So this would be 24 to 36 hours before the event or the day that you want to look your best. We're going to eat a little different this day, and it'll probably be pretty enjoyable actually. So we're going to drastically increase our carbohydrate intake to something like 2 to 3 times body weight. So for our example gentleman, this would be 400 to 600 grams of carbs, which is quite a bit more than he's been eating previously. I would stick to carbs that are not at the high end of glycemic index. So I wouldn't just go with, maple syrup and pancakes on this day. I mean, you could, it would probably still work, to be honest, but I would try to stick with like white rice, potatoes, carbs that are relatively simple, but not super, super high glycemic index. Fat, we're also going to push a little bit higher, about 0.5 gram per pound of body weight. So for our example individual, this would be 100 grams of fat. Protein, we're still keeping the same at 200. I would also, just to help a little bit more with any potential water retention, and make sure that when those carbs go in, your muscles are really starting to get volumized, so you get that pop look, but you're still looking dry and lean. I would limit water this day as much as possible. If you can keep it to like 36 ounces, maybe even less, that would be ideal. Now, it's going to be tough when you're eating a ton of carbs, but if you really want to maximize kind of like the peak and the pop on that last day, it's what you got to do. And then sodium, I would also keep relatively low on this day. And we're not going to do any cardio on this day. So no cardio, no training. It's just a chill day for you to refill your glycogen stores and let your body get fully recovered and ready to look awesome on the peak day. The amount of progress you can make with this depends on where you're starting from. Realistically, if you're 40% body fat and you do this program, yeah, you may make some progress, but you're not going to look like an on-stage bodybuilder at the end of 30 days, right? That's just not realistic. But if you're at a relatively lean body fat already, and you implemented a protocol like this, you could realistically look pretty awesome at the end of 30 days. Now, the peak week, the peaking strategy isn't exactly honest to how I would lose the most body fat in 30 days. Technically, if you didn't care about the peak and you just wanted to do an aggressive 30-day diet, cut out the peak week stuff and just continue as you were before. But this is the gist of how you look awesome in 30 days. All right, let's bring it all back together for a final summary. So we made sure that we were in a steep calorie deficit. We used 750 for this example, so we can make sure that our energy balance is as negative as possible. We're burning as much fat as possible. We also are implementing intermittent fasting as well as carb cycling, so we can maximize the effects of insulin on our training days and maximize the fat burning that we're going to accumulate on our non-training days. We're strength training and doing some HIIT, so we can maximize growth hormone as well as all of the other processes, which are going to allow us to keep and maintain muscle, because we don't want to lose any muscle during this cut. And then last of all, we're utilizing daily fasted cardio, low intensity, steady state, 20 to 45 minutes a day, so we can increase our energy expenditure as much as possible. And then as a bonus, if you decided to implement the peaking protocol, we did a glycogen refeed, so we can look as full, volumized, and also lean and dried out as possible on our peak day for that peak event. So that's it. I appreciate you guys as always. Like the video, sub if you want to see more stuff like this. Also, if you're enjoying this channel and this type of content and you want to get integrated with a community that has similar interests and is focusing on similar goals to you, I've got a free school community that I'm starting right now that I wanted to invite you guys to, that I'll eventually be dropping some more detailed content into. So some deep dive courses on metabolic health, strength training. I'll go in much more depth than what's here on YouTube. But if you want to join that community, it's free right now. And if you do, you'll get free lifetime access to all of those courses. Any of the content that I produce in that course will be totally free for you for life. And there's going to be quite a bit over there. So if that's something that interests you, feel free to hop over there. Links in the description for the school community. And as always, I appreciate you and your time and attention, and I'll see you in the next one.